Welcome to an interview in history, where imagination meets reality. In this episode, we bring you an imaginary interview, but with real people and real facts. While the conversation you're about to hear is a creative reimagining, every detail, every event, and every quote is grounded in truth. It's a different way to explore real stories, and we can't wait for you to experience it. Today, we sit down with one of the most controversial and powerful figures in American law enforcement, John Edgar Hoover, who was an American attorney and law enforcement administrator who served as the fifth and final director of the Bureau of Investigation and the first director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. President Calvin Coolidge first appointed Hoover as director of the BOI, the predecessor to the FBI, in 1924. After 11 years in the post, Hoover became instrumental in founding the FBI in June 1935, where he remained as director for an additional 37 years, serving a total of 48 years leading both the BOI and the FBI under 8 presidents. This interview takes place on February 12, 1972. Mr. Hoover, thank you for joining us.
The pleasure is mine. I always believed in the record speaking for itself, but sometimes context is just as important.
Then let's start at the beginning. Tell us about your early life, your family, your upbringing.
I was born on January 1st, 1895 in Washington, D.C. My parents were Father Dickerson Hoover and my mother, Anna Marie. My father worked for the federal government and was chief of the printing division of the United States Coast and Geodetic Survey, formerly a plate maker for the same organization. My mother was a deeply religious woman of Swiss-German descent. She was a dominant influence in my life, strict, orderly, and a devout Presbyterian. I had 3 siblings, a brother, Dickerson, Jr., 15 years older, and a sister, Lillian, 12 years older. I also had a second sister, Sadie Marguerite, who died at the age of 3, but my relationship with my mother was always the strongest. Among my family, I was the closest to my mother, who, despite being inclined to instruction, showed great affection towards me. Some might say she shaped the man I became. I was born in a house on the present site of Capitol Hill United Methodist Church, located on Seward Square near Eastern Market in Washington's Capitol Hill neighborhood. A stained glass window in the church is dedicated to me. I did not have a birth certificate filed upon my birth, although it was required in 1895 in Washington. 2 of my siblings did have certificates, but mine was not filed until 1938 when I was 43.
Were you always interested in law and justice?
Oh, from a young age. I valued discipline and order. I went to Central High School in D.C., where I joined the debate team. That taught me how to argue precisely and convincingly. I also sang in the school choir, participated in the Reserve Officers Training Corps program, and competed on the debate team. During debates, I argued against women getting the right to vote and against the abolition of the death penalty.
Is it true that you stuttered as a boy?
Yes, I stuttered as a boy, but I learned to manage by teaching myself to talk quickly, a style I have carried through my adult career. I spoke with such ferocious speed that stenographers had a hard time following me.
Anything else?
I then studied law at George Washington University, earning both my bachelor's and law degrees while working at the Library of Congress. That job sharpened my skills in organizing and indexing information, skills I would later apply extensively at the Bureau.
So then as a young man, you did have a job, to earn a bit of money?
I did. Like I said, when I was 18 years old, I accepted my first job, an entry-level position as manager in the orders department of the Library of Congress. The library was half a mile from my house. The experience shaped both me and the creation of the FBI profiles. This job trained me in the value of collating material. It gave me an excellent foundation for my work in the FBI, where it has been necessary to collate information and evidence. Then how did your path lead to the Bureau? I joined the Justice Department in 1917 during the First World War. By 1919, I was head of the General Intelligence Division, tasked with rooting out radicals. This was during the first Red Scare. We deported foreign-born anarchists and communists. It was a dangerous time. In 1924, after a scandal involving the previous director, I was appointed head of what was then to be called the Bureau of Investigation. I was only 29, and you would stay in that role for nearly 50 years. How did the FBI change under your leadership? It was in disarray when I took over. I professionalized it, introduced rigorous hiring standards. We required agents to have law or accounting degrees, created a fingerprint database, a centralized crime lab, and training at Quantico. I didn't just want agents with guns. I wanted men of intellect and discipline. The FBI became a model of federal law enforcement. Your personal life has long been the subject of speculation. Did you ever marry or have children? I never married. My work was my life. I lived with my mother until her death in 1938. After that, I kept a close circle. My closest associate was Clyde Tolson, my deputy. We spent a great deal of time together, both in and out of the office. As for children, I considered the Bureau my family. Let's talk about some of the high-profile cases. Which ones stand out? The 1930s were the gangster era. John Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, Bonnie and Clyde. We brought them all down. It was a war against crime. Later, the Cold War shifted our focus to communism. We investigated spies like Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Then came civil unrest, the civil rights movement, Vietnam protests, radical groups. Some people say I overreacted, but I always put national security first. I understand you were considered a bit unpredictable at times. Can you talk about that? Yes, I guess I was sometimes unpredictable in my leadership. I often fired Bureau agents, singling out those I thought looked stupid like truck drivers or whom I considered pinheads. I was also known to relocate agents who had displeased me to career-ending assignments and locations. Melvin Purvis was a prime example. Purvis was one of the most effective agents in capturing and breaking up the 1930s gangs, and it was alleged that I had maneuvered him out of the Bureau because of, at the time, it was thought that I was envious of the substantial public recognition Purvis received. But that was unfounded and definitely not true. There were also accusations of overreach, surveillance of civil rights leaders, especially Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What's your response? I believe communism infiltrated many movements. Dr. King, though a man of peace, associated with known radicals. We had to protect the country. Some of the tactics we used might be questioned, but at the time, they were necessary. The Soviet threat was real. I've heard that you personally ordered to cease the investigation of the bombing of the federal inquiry into the 1963 16th Street Baptist Church bombing by members of the Ku Klux Klan that killed 4 girls. Are you willing to talk about that? Sure. By May 1965, local investigators and FBI had identified suspects in the bombing and witnesses, and this information was relayed to me. No prosecutions of the 4 suspects ensued, even though the evidence was reportedly so strong that even a white Alabama jury would convict. But there had been a history of mistrust between local and federal investigators. So, I wrote a memo that the chances of conviction were remote, and I told my agents not to share the results with federal or state prosecutors. In 1968, the FBI formally closed their investigation into the bombing without filing charges against any of the named suspects. The files were sealed by order of me. End of story. You've led the FBI all these years. What do you think your legacy is? I built a bureau that became the standard for federal law enforcement worldwide. I enforced the law, sometimes at personal cost. History can judge my methods, but no one can question my results. Order, discipline, patriotism. Those were the pillars of my life. J. Edgar Hoover, thank you so much for your time and for helping us understand the man behind the myth. Thank you. The truth, like a good file, is best kept in order. When Nixon took office in January 1969, Hoover had just turned 74. There was a growing sentiment in Washington, D.C. that the aging FBI agent should retire. But Hoover's power and friends in Congress remained too strong for him to be forced to do so. Hoover remained director of the FBI until he died of a heart attack in his Washington home on May 2, 1972, whereupon operational command of the Bureau was passed on to Associate Director Clyde Tolson. On May 3, 1972, Nixon appointed L. Patrick Gray, a Justice Department official with no FBI experience, as acting director of the FBI, with W. Mark Felt becoming Associate Director. Hoover's body lay in state in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, where Chief Justice Warren Burger eulogized him. Up to that time, Hoover was the only civil servant to have lain in state, according to the New York Daily News. The New York Times observed that this was an honor accorded to only 21 persons before, of whom 8 were presidents or former presidents. President Nixon delivered another eulogy at the funeral service in the National Presbyterian Church and called Hoover one of the giants whose long life brimmed over with magnificent achievement and dedicated service to this country, which he loved so well. Hoover was buried in the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., next to the graves of his parents and a sister who had died in infancy. And now, another forgotten history. Charlie Parkhurst, the one-eyed stagecoach driver who hid a powerful secret in the rough and tumble world of 19th century California. Charlie Parkhurst was a legend. A fearless stagecoach driver, Charlie was known for mastering the reins through the Sierra Nevada, racing horses over treacherous mountain passes, and surviving bandits, accidents, and snowstorms. With a patch over one eye and a tobacco-chewing, hard-drinking demeanor, Charlie earned the respect of fellow drivers and the admiration of passengers who knew they were safe in that wagon. Parkhurst became one of Wells Fargo's most trusted hands, delivering mail and gold across the wild frontier. But Charlie Parkhurst carried a secret that would not be discovered until death. When Charlie passed away in 1879, undertakers were shocked to find that the grizzlied, one-eyed stagecoach driver was biologically a female. Even more astonishing, it appeared that Charlie had once given birth. No one had known, not the rough miners, not the business owners, not the companions who shared saloons and campfires. Charlie had lived as a man for more than 30 years, carving out a life of independence and daring that women of the time were rarely permitted to pursue. Historians now believe that Charlie Parkhurst, born Charlotte Darky Parkhurst in Vermont, escaped an abusive upbringing and sought freedom by becoming someone new. Charlie lived, voted, possibly making Parkhurst the first woman to vote in the United States presidential election in 1868, disguised as a man, and worked in a world where such freedoms were denied to women. Charlie's story is one of survival, reinvention, and quiet rebellion. A reminder that the American frontier was not just shaped by gunfighters and gold seekers, but by those who dared to define their own destiny, even in secret. Join us next week when we talk with Roscoe Conkling, or Fatty Arbuckle, one of the most popular actors of the silent film era. Until then, take care.